Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 303, Farm-Based Healthcare with Dr. Ron Weiss.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talked to Dr. Ron Weiss all about farm-based healthcare. And we're not really sure if you've heard that term before, but his approach to prescription is extremely interesting because they grow all of their own prescriptions. And no, it's not what you're thinking. It's not the new legalized Canadian drugs here in Canada. It is actually real food that you would eat to nourish your body. And his journey really had a lot to do with his father's illness and what he was able to see through his dad's, I'm not going to say recovery, but through his dad's journey. And he was able to come to this place where instead of practicing medicine inside a medical center or a hospital, although he does do some hospital work as well, he decided that it needs to be done on a farm. So they bought this humongous farm and they really have a huge lifestyle medicine type practice there, which is not only giving prescriptions for plant-based lifestyle, but providing those plants as well. We think that it's really, really interesting. And if you stick through till the end, you'll hear his 5 pillars for lifestyle medicine. And really what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to book a vacation at his clinic is really what I think.
Yeah, he really paints a nice picture of a place that you want to visit that sounds very healing and is an atmosphere and environment that is something you really want right next door to your own home.
I think I healed as I listened and did this podcast.
Yeah, we probably both did. So if you don't know Dr. Ron Weiss, he's not only a doctor, he's also become a farmer, and he's the founder of Ethos Health, which is the farm-based healthcare system that's connecting human health to the natural world and promotes mindfulness and healthy ways of living. Ethos Farm is a 342-acre land which is located in Long Valley, New Jersey, and they grow produce using regenerative methods, which we get into in the show, and he terms them as living medicines, which is part of their evidence-based diet of whole plant foods to reverse and prevent chronic disease. Dr. Weiss, who practices and teaches lifestyle medicine in an old wooden farmhouse right in the middle of the growing fields, is also the assistant professor of clinical medicine at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. We want to thank everyone for their support with the Yummy Foods activity book for kids that we recently published and is now available on Amazon and Kindle. We know it's being used in homeschooling programs as community outreach materials, as well as a way to keep kids busy, learning, and having fun without electronics. We wanted to share a few testimonials happy customers have left, and this one's from Jessica.
I love learning about new foods. Still being a fairly new vegan family, I would love for them to learn even more. I was pleasantly surprised when we received the workbooks and every one of my children, ages 1, 3, 8, 10, 12, and 16, took interest. Wow. Well done, Shoshana and Adam. This book is interesting, fun, informative, and I feel good about the fact that my kids are not only wanting to play with it, but they are learning at the same time. Win-win.
This one's from Timothy.
The recipe activities are great. No stress. It's a way to bond with your kids in the kitchen and teach basic kitchen skills. I recommend it for homeschooling, church-based programs, and presentations to elementary school kids. The worksheets can also be used as fun activities to test basic food literacy knowledge in adult-based presentations.
To get yourself or a young one a copy, visit the link in our show notes, which is planttrainers.com/yummyfoods, or search Yummy Foods on your country's Amazon site. And now for a moment of gratitude.
I'm grateful for childhood memories. I do have a very good long-term memory. Sometimes I remember things in more detail than other people even remember happening in general. But recently we lost an older member of the family. I believe he was 93 or 94, a great uncle. And it just made me reflect on a lot of the memories that I had as a child getting to know him. So it's a wonderful feeling.
Last week, I turned 5 years old. And I say that I turned 5 because, as you know in my story, I was told that I wouldn't live past the age of 40. So I'm so grateful to have a new shot at this life, and I'm thriving 5 years after I was told I wouldn't be.
Dr. Ron Weiss, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Thank you for having me here.
We were just chatting before the show, and we are excited to hear what we're going to chat about going forward for all of the listeners. But before we do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share?
I do. I am sitting here in my office this morning looking out upon these green valley that my medical practice is on a farm in the middle of a valley, and I'm grateful for the green earth and all of its beauty. That's what I'm grateful for this morning.
We've seen some wonderful pictures of the land where your practice is, and it's gorgeous. And I believe you're in New Jersey. Is that right?
I am. The Garden State.
The Garden State. That's not what we called it when we were kids. But
Did you grow up in New Jersey?
No, we grew up in Canada, but we learned that it was the armpit state. I'm sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
I know. Old habits die hard, and I'm sure the majority of the population still considers it to be that.
But no, but it is gorgeous, and it's so close to New York, such a great hub. It's definitely wonderful for sure. But
I think so.
is it actually green now? Because here in Canada, we had snow and hail last night.
Yeah, it is. We're in agricultural zone 6B, so our grasses are really greening up, and our front. So we have a huge front lawn through which you enter the farm. The entrance of the farm is this gravel road which winds past these large lawns, and of course, we don't. It's a very old farm. These lawns have been here for a couple of hundred years. And we never apply anything to them. We just cut them. And they've come over these hundreds of years to incorporate all kinds of flowering plants in them, maybe 50 or 60 different kinds. So right now, we're looking at a sea of golden dandelions, so many of them that you can barely see the green. It's just a sea of yellow. So that's what it looks like today.
That sounds great. And I want to come back to the land and everything that you're doing with the land a little bit later on. But why don't you give us a little bit of a background and let us know when your plant-based journey began?
So, my plant-based journey has been an excruciatingly slow one through different stages of my life. I would say to some degree it started when I was a child. My mother and father always insisted upon pouring a lot of resources into food and high quality, what we thought were high quality foods. I remember in the 1960s, for the first time, like I was born in 62, I'm now 57 years old, but in the late 60s or 1970, there was a warning, the first warning came out about sodium nitrite and nitrate in food as a preservative, that it could be carcinogenic. And that was the last time we saw cold cuts in our school lunch. And then about a couple of years later, there was a warning about mercury in canned tuna fish. Goodbye to tuna fish, never saw that. And by the time I became a teenager, plants played an increasingly important role in my diet. The central portion of my diet from early teens on was a huge salad, like a family-sized salad. Never had iceberg lettuce. It was always dark, leafy greens, shredded up cabbage, carrots, and my mother would make this for me every night in a large, if you would see this, you'd think it maybe would serve like 8 people. And I'd have that 7 nights a week, including other vegetables, whatever. Always had at the end of the meal or the latter part of the meal, a chicken breast or a piece of fish or something like that. But quite frankly, because we were eating so many plants, didn't eat a lot of that stuff because I was full already. By the time I got to medical school, I volunteered for an experiment where the professors asked for medical student volunteers in order to assess vitamin and antioxidant levels in the blood, I volunteered for randomly. I didn't think that I would particularly have high levels because I really didn't know what the power was of what I was eating. And they gave us the professors gave instructions to make sure we did not take any vitamins or supplements for 2 weeks before the blood test. And they took my blood, and then they called me in for a special meeting a few days after the blood test, and they started to read me the Riot Act. And the researchers started to tell me, we're angry, saying, we told you not to take any supplements. I said, I've never taken a supplement in my life. They said, well, look at all these things. They're off the charts. We can't even, they're beyond the normal limits, some of the limits of the machine to measure, like carotenes and vitamin A and C. And I said, well, I guess it must be because I'm eating what I'm eating. But I really didn't pay it more mind than that until I think it was, I was a year out of graduating my residency in internal medicine. And my father was diagnosed with end-stage metastatic pancreas cancer suddenly. He had an acute abdominal pain, and within a couple of weeks, we found out what the cause was. We took him to the world's greatest cancer hospital. He was given 1 to 3 months to live and told to get his affairs in order. There was really no treatment that could help him. And I took him home, moved back home to live with him, to take care of him. And out of desperation, I just strolled down to the public library, started to go through the stacks, just randomly looking for things. At that time, I don't know if you remember Andrew Weil had started to come out. Integrative or alternative medicine was starting to play a role in healthcare. And I started to look at things like this and books on diet and Chinese medicine and all this stuff. And I picked up a book in the library on testimonials of people who had survived from cancer eating a macrobiotic diet, which is a type of whole plant food diet. And in it, I found a gentleman who later went on to found the University of South Carolina School of Public Health, who overcame the same pancreatic cancer at late stage that my father had. I brought this home to my father, this book. He was interested in trying this diet, and so we were off. I took him to see Michio Kushi, who was the leading proponent of this movement in the United States, and we adopted the diet, and he had a startling improvement in his situation. He was on, pancreatic cancer is severely painful, and he was off his Percocets and pain pills within 2 days of starting a plant-based diet. He was an attorney, and he could not work anymore. He was back in the office within a week, and he was at the gym in a few weeks and running by the end of the month. And 3 months later, we had CAT scans showing that he had about a 1/3 reduction in his main tumor masses, which by that time had overtaken a lot of his liver. And then 6 months later, further reduction, a 50% improvement in the size of his tumor masses. And because he went on to live not 1 or 3 months, but 18 months. But because he had a dramatic turnaround, not just in the size of the tumors, but in the way he felt, to the point where he was convinced that he would overcome his cancer and that it was going to be curable. So that was when I saw this happening, and I saw, the shrinkage of these malignant tumors, because he hadn't accepted the 5-fluorouracil, which was the ineffectual chemo being offered by the cancer hospital. I knew that it could only be due to one thing, because I had taken care of many patients like him, and they just inexorably died. it could only be the food. So I did not know why it was the food at the time, but it was something to do with the food because that's the only thing he changed. And it was better than chemo, much better. So it wasn't until probably a few years later with the publication of the work of Judah Folkman, who first described how angiogenesis of tumor cells can be interrupted by plant molecules, phytonutrients, that I began to understand what happened to my father's tumor. And because he stopped eating animal foods, which were also an incitement for tumor growth. And then, as you mentioned, you had Michael Greger on your program, and he's gifted us with this rich platform of all of the and brought to light all of this data and experimental information and evidence, and made it known to all of us, the public, which is so wonderful. But a lot of when you look at his work and all the information he gives out of nutritionfacts.org, a lot of that stuff, it's evident, has come to light in the past decade or so. And it shows why my father could have had that reduction in his tumor growth. It shows the mechanisms and it elucidates them. And so now I understand. Now I understand what happened to my father.
Was there something special about that version of a plant-based diet? You said it was a macrobiotic.
Macrobiotic.
So what exactly does that mean?
Well, there are different versions of the macrobiotic diet. To my father, he was placed on a severely strict macrobiotic diet, which consisted of the following. It consisted of a lot of not as much as I use today here in my practice, but a hefty amount of cruciferous dark leafy greens, brown rice, maybe a couple of other grains such as buckwheat, but not wheat and other grains. It consisted of it specifically excluded nightshade plants such as peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, and potatoes. Specifically excluded all fruits in his diet. There was a lot of legumes, but often with high salt content. It has its roots in Japanese sensibilities and plant-based eating. And, miso was there with salt in it. And, umeboshi plums were there. A lot of salted or brined products. So that's basically what it consisted of. And he was, adhered to that diet.
It's very interesting because it's actually a little confusing because you hear so many doctors talking about these different versions of the plant-based diet and how they heal disease and battle illness. I mean, you talk to Dr. Esselstyn, we spoke to him on the show also, and he's the no oil guy. And you talk to Dr. McDougall, who's the all potato guy. And the version that you just spoke about, the macrobiotic, didn't have potatoes in it, but it healed disease. So there's so many different...
No, but it did have starches.
It did have starches,
okay.
but...
So here's where... So if I had to get these guys into a room and look at this diet, here's where they would have approved. Dr. McDougall would have approved because he's eating loads of brown rice. Brown rice was with every meal.
Right.
Don't forget, legumes do have a lot of starch in it. So it would satisfy it had other like Asian sensibilities in it, like Japanese sensibilities, like it had a lot of seaweed in it, sea vegetables. However, he would have not liked it because it was high in salt.
Right.
When I say high in salt, I don't mean as high as the standard American diet, but obviously higher than we would like in the whole food plant-based world. Right. Dr. Esselstyn would have liked it because it focused on his, if you ever heard him do his greens wrap, the greens list.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's done it for you. So it had all those greens in it. And he would have also liked it because it did not have a drop of oil in it.
Right.
Again, he wouldn't have liked the salt content of it, but as far as the cancer treatment is concerned, salt is probably something that is neither here nor there specifically that we have evidence of. We know that salt from a cardiovascular and arterial perspective does a lot of damage. We have evidence that salt can even very adversely affect asthma in those patients who have it. But as far as cancer is gone, I don't think we have any specific evidence on deleterious effects.
I think what it comes down to is that every body is different, and that there's no denying that plant-based diet is definitely the superior diet. But when you have somebody presenting with cancer or with heart disease, or who seems completely normal and feels completely normal on the inside and the outside and a good weight and all of that, that there's a specific diet for each of those people, and that person who feels great and is a good weight and has no issues, there's no reason for them to be on a strict macrobiotic diet or a plant-based keto diet or anything like that. No. Then, that's when Dr. Greger's diet is, not the dirty dozen, the Queen
15.
No, what does he say? Dr.
His
daily dozen. Yeah, that his daily dozen is, perfect for most people, but when we have people who are sick, then we need to get into more specifics.
And not that, I just want to make it clear, what I have chosen, that knowing, that's what we defaulted to because I didn't know any better. Would I have chosen that diet today if I could start all over again with my father and exclude from his diet powerful phytonutrients that are in dark berries and fruits and other kinds of things? Absolutely not. There were a lot of spices that were excluded. I wouldn't, in fact, if I had to redesign, knowing what I do today, a lot of these foods have the most potent anti-cancer, anti-angiogenic factors in it. So I'd include them. And to what you're saying, we often have patients come in here, and we do have the basic model, the Chevy for the plant-based whole foods trajectory for the average person, but sometimes we modify it based on specific disease processes.
So is it because of your father that you switched to healing patients as opposed to managing disease the way that you were most probably taught in university?
Yes. Bingo.
We got it. So, and you found a really interesting way to do it. I mean, there are many doctors.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You just made me think. So I know probably if somebody's seen my videos or me interviewed before, that point that you're talking about occurred when we went back to the hospital, this best cancer hospital in the world. And we went back a year after my father's diagnosis when he was still doing very well. And we were seeing the department chairman for solid tumors at this hospital. And we walked back in and he saw my father and he turned a little ashen because we assumed my father was dead. We had sort of disconnected ourselves for a little while from that system. Because we were so busy with the plans. And then we decided to go back after a year to see maybe if there's something else that had come up, maybe some experimental drug or protocol or something to find information. And so when he asked my father, what was going on, why he looked good, what were you doing? And my father started to talk about kale and seaweed and brown rice or whatever. He lost complete interest. It was as if a wall came down between us and the doctor, and he didn't want anything to do with it. And he just went on to talk about, this trial and that chemo agent and that drug, and that was it. And that was the point, that moment when I decided that we weren't crazy. This wasn't make-believe. I knew what had happened to my father, and that's when I decided to go down that path.
That's amazing. And it essentially turned you into a farmer.
Well, I'd been dreaming of being a farmer since I was a small child. That moment made me evaluate and think about how I had learned medicine and how I was treating patients and what I was doing with them And I said, I can't do this anymore.
There's so much more great information coming your way, but before we get to that, we wanted to share with you our 3 biggest complaints that we have about cookbooks. 1, sometimes we just don't know where to get the ingredients. 2, sometimes we buy an ingredient and use so little of it and have so much left over. What a waste of money and waste of a resource. And 3, if there's no picture, we're not making it. We need to be able to visualize things and see what it's going to look like when it's done so that we could do our best with it. And a bonus complaint is that we're busy parents with jobs who exercise and we just don't have time for the fancy stuff. That's why we created the Easy Recipes for Busy Parents e-cookbook. You don't need to be busy and you don't need to be parents, but we promise you'll find all the ingredients in no time. The same ingredients get used over and over again, so there's no waste. There are pictures for every recipe, and it'll be easy. If that's good enough for you, check out the link in the show notes or go to planttrainers.com/shop and get your cookbook today. And now back to the show.
Can you explain to the listeners a little bit more about how you're using the land and farming to be able to help the community and your patients?
Ooh, how many days do you have? Well, in general, a general overview is that we believe, and there's a lot of, because we practice evidence-based medicine, right? We also practice evidence-based farming too. Farming and medicine are very parallel and related disciplines. So we believe, based on the evidence, that it matters the way you grow plant foods. It matters to human health. It matters to planetary health and the environment. And just growing any plant foods any old way is not good enough. So we, on our farm, we are mindful of using methods that focus on the health of the soil, the constituents of the soil, and primarily the most important one is the microbiome of the soil, just as the microbiome of human beings and their gut is ground zero of our health. A lot of those organisms come from the soil because we come from the soil. So we concentrate our efforts on this farm and this community on taking the beautiful soils that this farm was and this valley was endowed with millions of years ago and restoring them because they're really good soils. And then once in that restorative process, which takes many years, once we produce food out of those soils, those properties are transmitted to the people who eat them. And the wildlife that's cloak the fields and take refuge in our fields and surrounding forests and drink the water that comes from these fields and so on and so forth. The water that flows from this farm and this valley is consumed by 1.5 million people downriver from us. So even though they have never been to this farm, or may not know where it is, their health is impacted by what we do on this farm. So that's a little overview of our farm.
So what you're saying is that not all kale is created equal. And depending on the seeds and where it's planted and how it's taken care of, that one leaf of kale is going to be that much more powerful in the healing process and the preventative process in one person's body as opposed to one piece of kale that's just been planted in your front yard in some suburb with no cultivation of the land whatsoever.
Definitely. Or perhaps, the largest issue we have is the chemical management of food and the raising of food and the growing of food that has been raised with chemically based methods. So that's very harmful to our world and to the future generations and to us currently.
And then you're not just prescribing these fruits, vegetables, what have you, to your patients. You're actually giving them the ability to take from the farm home with them. Is it a CSA kind of thing? Is that how it works?
Well, we started off as a CSA in our early years, but then we transition that to just because the CSA is somewhat, it's closed off, right? You have to have it has certain, we found that the CSA had certain benefits, but then also certain detractors. It's sort of, once it starts, that's it. You take your membership for the season and then it's sort of going. And then, you have to put up a lot of money in the beginning, which people may not have. And then it excludes people who may want to come in at different points. So we decided that, and then a lot of people would get things that they would waste and not eat, because the CSA generally, the basic model is that it delivers this amount of goods, this bag of produce to you. You take it or leave it. You just take it. So, like the first season, our specialty on this farm is the growing of greens. We think we grow the most fabulous greens that we know of. And one of my favorites is escarole. And we would grow the most gorgeous heads of escarole. They were like twice the size of a human head. And people would just leave them. We put them out in our bins and say, take 2 of those every week. They'd just all be left over. People wouldn't want them at all. So in any event, what we have now is we have we call it the Doctor's Farm Market. It's a farm stand, and all people are welcome to come in. People who've never been here before, you can just drive off the road. We have a little sandwich board at the shoulder of the road, and you're welcome to come. It's open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And yeah, it's open to anyone, including our patients. The method, we subscribe to a specific method of growing. I guess if you had to put a label on it, it's called regenerative organic. It's not just, although we are certified organic, it goes beyond organic standards. And so that's what this produce actually is that's for sale in our farm stand.
So when you say regenerative organic, is that all that you've talked about already, or is there a different way to explain that?
I guess what I've talked about is part and parcel of what regenerative means, but what I've said is not probably specific. If I had to specifically tell you what the definition is, it means, the way I look at it is that farming is a mining operation. So when you plant food and in a soil and then you remove it, you are removing the health of the soil. You're removing nutrients. That's what we need to eat to build ourselves, but it's gone from the soil. And regenerative agriculture means that you restore the soil and restore the environment from which you robbed your food from. Organic certification in agriculture does not address that, doesn't necessarily do it, whereas regenerative organic does. So I think if I had to give you a succinct definition, that's what it is.
I don't think we mentioned the name of the farm. It's Ethos Farm. Is that right?
Yes, Ethos Farm in Long Valley, New Jersey.
I'm pretty fascinated to know how you're getting your patients to come to you, because it seems like, he's the guy on the farm who happens to be a doctor. It's kind of weird to go to a doctor on a farm if I'm not feeling well or if I have an illness.
It is weird.
Yeah,
I was very concerned about that in the beginning.
Yeah, so
because first of all, this is a rural valley. There are, just to blow up your impressions of New Jersey, I guess if you came to this valley, you wouldn't even imagine that you were anywhere close to New Jersey. There are 42 permanently preserved farms in our town alone. And most of the breadth of this entire valley is permanently preserved and in agriculture. It's surrounded by thousands of acres of forest. So it's not, and our farm is the center of the valley. So it's not like, it's next to a medical arts building. There is a main street in town, but it's very ancient with some historic buildings on it. And it's not the kind of place where people who are sick, who would be looking for a doctor, would figure they would want to go. However, I think, and I know that you guys do this because you approach health from a different perspective. I think that's what's needed for the patient who's looking to get better. They're not entering the typical medical complex or a hospital or a clinic or a medical arts building where doctors are present. When they drive in through that gravel road and hear the gravel crunching under their feet and see the ancient trees, I think they begin to understand that it's a place of healing. So in that respect, I think once the person finds themselves here, they get it. But if they don't know, it would be kind of hard to find their way here.
You're painting a very beautiful picture of the lay of your land, and it makes me think of Dr. Ornish, who was on our show talking about lifestyle medicine, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how that impacts your patients being out there and using lifestyle medicine as part of your prescription along with the food that you're recommending they consume.
Yes. So, we have all kinds of patients coming to us, from children to elderly people with all kinds of problems. I would say about half of the patients who come to us have no idea what a whole food plant-based diet is. And although everyone knows exercising is good for you, they're not engaged at all. And then about the other half of the people who come to us are actually plant-based to some degree, if not 100%. So when we have the first group of people come to us, we are in the, not awkward, but in the somewhat interesting position of having to describe to the newcomer what they fell into. And, the people do not, just as it pertains to your last question, people don't fall in here by accident. They can't. It's not like they saw a doctor sign. We don't have a doctor sign on the road front, although it's a county road. They would have to get here because they specifically knew that I was a little unusual or I did unusual things. I'm not going to prescribe medications for them. But they don't really understand what lifestyle medicine, they don't understand what whole food plant-based living is. They just don't. So we explain it to them. And this is what we say. We say that health is not luck and that it is predetermined by the individual. And that control over your health comes by living things. It comes by the way you live. It doesn't come by visiting, doesn't come by getting screening mammograms, but looking for trouble. And it doesn't come by visiting doctors and getting bottles of prescriptions that you have to take. And then we describe what these living things are. And the cornerstone of all the living pursuits is nutrition, and specifically a diet of whole plant foods. And the second sector of these living activities is fitness. And the third sector is the mindset and emotional component that is so powerful in human beings. And the fourth set is the mysterious realm of sleep. And we have added a fifth set, a fifth pillar to these lifestyle pursuits, because we think that it is so important that it really should get its own sector, which you really have to pay attention to in maintaining, and that is the gut microbiome. So those are the 5 aspects of lifestyle health for us. One by one, how do we help patients with that here with the food? Well, I think that's obvious. We indoctrinate them and inspire them by eating whole plant foods, and we, help them with their diets, and we have programs and all kinds of regimens that help them. We have the food, the farm stand that has vegetables available to them and fruits if they're interested. The fitness aspect, we get heavily engaged in that with our patients. We have our highest level program is called A Year of Mindful Living. And in that year, We typically send all of our patients. We have fitness evaluations done on them. They're like 90-minute fitness evaluations, which examines in depth each of the core areas of fitness, including flexibility and balance and aerobic capacity and muscle strength. Then following that, we work on their mindset by, introducing them to the world of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And, sleep, we always concentrate on. And then lastly, the microbiome. As you know, that eating a lot of whole plant foods will get you a very excellent microbiome. But we go one step further because, the farm itself has its own microbiome, which is extremely desirable, especially because of the way the soil is managed here. And then that microbiome of the soil gets onto the produce that the farm gives to its customers and patients. And so we believe that we can further benefit the microbiome of the people who eat the food here because it's directly transmitted from the soil to them.
It makes a lot of sense to us, and it's a very fascinating concept. I wonder how you've influenced the other professionals in your field, other doctors specifically. Do you find that doctors are starting to look at a plant-based lifestyle a little bit differently these days as more and more, in our space with the podcast and the people we speak to, we've found a lot of plant-based doctors. But outside of this immediate space, do you think doctors or medical schools are starting to realize the impact that plant-based nutrition can have?
No. So, if I had to, I'll give you an example. So I am on staff at a hospital, which is 25 minutes down the road from our farm. And I am not aware. This hospital has 4,000 employees and maybe 1,000 doctors. It's ranked by U.S. News and World Reports as being one of the 2 best hospitals in the state. And we have a very sophisticated medical care system here. If you notice, I did not say healthcare system. And I am not aware, other than an integrative doctor who is at the Integrative Medicine Center at the hospital, who's a cardiologist, I am not aware of another doctor who I would consider a plant-based whole foods doctor at the hospital. Not aware. And so I'm not saying there isn't one, but I'm not aware of them. And in general, when I deal with my colleagues, my conventional colleagues, many of them who are excellent doctors, that's the other thing. When I make sure there is interplay. Sometimes we do need help from specialists, and it's hard to find. I'm a primary doctor. Sometimes when people get into trouble, I do need to access, not that often, but do need a specialist. And it's really hard to find specialists in most areas that are plant-based. So I interact with my colleagues who are specialists, who are conventional, and they're excellent doctors, but they don't in general at all acknowledge what we do here. Even though I refer patients to them, there's no acknowledgement. They're very kind and nice and they'll help the patient, but no acknowledgement.
Right.
So, and I am an assistant professor of clinical medicine at the medical school in Newark, where I graduated from, which is about 50 minutes away. And, there is one of the Saul Batista, who is graduating this year, was just honored by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine with a national award. He set up one of the first lifestyle medicine medical school student interest associations at that school. He's a fantastic individual. Sarai Stanchik, who is my colleague, who is a fantastic plant-based doctor. I don't know if you know about her. She recently came out with an autobiographical film called Code Blue.
Yeah.
You should have her on your podcast. She's fantastic.
Yeah, so she's on our list.
We'd appreciate an introduction. I've Facebook messaged her a couple of times.
I would do that.
Yeah.
So she is we work together with the medical students. She is their official advisor, and it's just been really hard. Yeah. They're good people at the medical school, but and I'm not trying to. They're trying for the first time ever. The medical school dedicated an entire half day to, and I believe Dr. Stanchik was the lecturer a few weeks ago, which was compulsory. They mandated that all, I think, first-year medical students go to lifestyle medicine lectures that were delivered by Dr. Stanchik. That's the first time I am ever aware that that's happened at my alma mater.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult in Canada, we're in Toronto, to find plant-based doctors as your family doctor. And I know we just had Dr. Shane Williams on our show, who lives a couple hours away from where we live. So there are a few of them spread out. And for those people that are looking for plant-based doctors, I know there's a website that they can go to. I don't remember the name of it. It might be Plant-Based MD or plantbaseddoctors.org.
I think Plant-Based Docs or...
Yeah, something like that. I'll put it in the show notes so people can check it out. But for someone who's looking to elevate their nutrition game, to get a little bit healthier than they currently are, what would be a couple things that you would recommend they do to get themselves kickstarted? Are
they already plant-based, or are you referring to someone who is just starting from zero?
Someone who's just getting started, dabbled a little bit in the plant-based lifestyle, but hasn't really connected with it fully yet.
I think the first thing that we try to talk to patients about is you have to decide what kind of person you are as far as what kind of approach best suits you. We believe there are basically two kinds of approaches. There's a diving in approach, and then there's a leaning in approach. And, different people like different kinds of approaches. Mm-hmm. So if you're a leaner, you may want to that's the kind of gradual thing where you may want to just, start with some meal replacements where, you'll maybe just for breakfast, you'll just eat plants for breakfast, because that's an easy one, right? Most people eat cereal, grains, and fruits. That's a major part of their breakfast. You could just cut out the eggs and cut out, the bacon or whatever. And then you could start leaning in, maybe picking off bigger chunks as you go through the day for different meals or meatless Mondays. But if you decide you're more of a diver and you just want to go full force, I think you have to decide there are different levels you can enter at. So what I generally tell people to do is I like to have them watch Forks Over Knives, the movie. Yeah. Because I think it's a very inspirational movie. There's a lot going on in there. And it just gives you, it's shorter read than a book. And you can get the feeling that this is a very powerful world from just reading that. And then, we start to give resources. You could give people resources that are already ready so that they can dive in, like Michael Greger's, How Not to Die and its accompanying cookbook, or even the Forks Over Knives cookbook. And without formal help, we say, let's go. You take these resources, watch the movie, read a couple of books, and here's some recipes. Start making them. I have found that, at least among our patients, there is a certain segment of patients who can just do that. They're okay with just doing that, and they'll get by on their own to an acceptable degree of diet. But a lot of people, even given those resources, they still need coaching help. They still need coaches to bring them along, and even my help to sort of instill and inspire them to keep going. And that's why we have programs here. Our programs are heavily coach supported.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you are a great resource as well. And there's so many other ones out there. If people want to reach out to you, where would you say would be the best place for them to go?
They can go to our website, which is ethoshealth.org. We have a beautiful Instagram page, and you can always see what's happening on the farm. I like to post farm pictures of different exciting things that we're doing here on the farm, and that would be My Ethos Health. That's our tag at Instagram. We do have a Facebook page too. The Facebook page is Ethos Health. And I just wanted to, you can always call us. As I said, we do have, we interact with the public through our food. Our farm stand is always open. You can come any weekend. We do have fantastic events here coming up, starting in a couple of weeks. We have what we call Ethos Farm Days. There are these half-day events starting from 10 until 3, which incorporate educating the community on our agricultural practices and the way food we think should be grown. So we have a farm tour. We have the farm market is open. We have a lifestyle panel with all of our Ethos staff where we show people, we take one of our patients and there's a panel discussion as to how lifestyle is the most effective way to overcome and prevent health issues. And then we have a fantastic keynote speaker. We have Dr. Joel Furman coming. We have Gene Bauer from Farm Sanctuary. We have Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn is coming in July. We have Garth Davis coming in August. We have Scott Stoll from Plantrition coming in September. We have Colin Campbell coming in October. So we're extremely fortunate. And that, as I'm speaking, you asked me what I'm grateful for before. I'm very grateful that these individuals have donated their time to come and do this. And then we end the day with a fantastic plant-based whole foods potluck lunch for the community. So those days, you can find them on our events page or our website. If you're interested in getting medical or help from a health perspective from us, you can just reach out to us over the telephone. Or I am a regular working doctor, and I see patients in this office in the fields, surrounded by the vegetables. So yeah, that's about it, I think.
That's great. We're going to put all the links to everything you just mentioned in our show notes at planttrainers.com so people could reach out and find you. If you were next door here, I'd be visiting your farm all the time. It sounds like an amazing place to be. I'd
be squatting in the corner somewhere in the field.
We'll put you up if you come. Why don't you come and visit us?
It just sounds like such a great place, and we know that you're healing so many people. So thank you so much for doing that for your community and for coming on to the show today and sharing what you're doing in your life and how people could find you and get a little bit healthier. We really do appreciate you spending time with us today on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans. It really helps other people find us just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is at Plant Trainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.